Hello and welcome in to Addison 35th podcast, your Chicago baseball podcast here on the Just Baseball Media Network. My name, of course, is Herb Lawrence. You can follow me on Twitter at Ecknerwall23. That is my last name, Lawrence, spelled backwards, 234, the great Robin Ventura. Today, and I think this whole week, we'll be talking. I know you're here for White Sox conversation, but you've heard me ramble about this terrible team for way too long. Let's get into some actual good teams. These teams in the AL Central, three of them who went to the playoffs last year. And we're going to start off hot with the team who I respect the most and the team who I think is still going to be the AL Central champions at the end of this 2025, the Cleveland Guardians. And joining me to talk about this is Nick Pedone, GM and host at Big Play Sports Network and host on weekends at 92.3 The Fan in Cleveland. Nick, thank you for joining me here on Addison, the 35th podcast.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's always great to talk baseball. Always great to talk American League Central, of course. And this is, the best time of year for baseball fans. I mean, it's opening week. It's finally here. Spring training, Cactus League breakout, all in the rear view. And we could just get ready to talk some guards, some regular season baseball. Finally, I've been waiting.
It must feel great. I don't know how it feels because I'm a Chicago fan and all our teams are terrible. Like the Cleveland Cavs are doing well. The Guards are coming off of a great year last year, even though they didn't win at all. I think eventually this team will do it. I mean, the Browns are the Browns, which you can't do anything with the Browns, but it's a great time to be in Cleveland. And I want to focus right there. Like, you're a Clevelander. Like, how did you become a Indians, I assume, and then now a Guardians fan? What is your Indians fan origins?
Yeah, for sure. Growing up in Cleveland, Cleveland sports, big part of my DNA, big part of my makeup. I was never a big baseball fan. I'll be honest. Like growing up, especially like early on, Cleveland had LeBron. This was a LeBron James town. For my generation of sports fans. So always a big Cavs fan. I played basketball, so I always gravitated towards the Cavs. Of course, Cleveland is a Browns town, so Browns kind of dominate everything, even though they're not the greatest team in town, really have not been my entire life. The Cleveland Browns dominate what we talk about in Cleveland, really 365 days out of the year, 24/7, even on Christmas. It's a Cleveland Browns town. So just growing up and having sports being such a big part of my fabric and my upbringing, it was just natural to be an Indians fan. My dad grew up, in a time where the Cleveland Indians were not great. And then thankfully, later in his life, he got to see the late 90 teams, which are iconic here with, Baerga, Loft, and Vizquel. So he, became in love with the Indians and now the Guards just because of their rich baseball history and kind of was a fan of them growing up. So when I was growing up, Guards were always on TV, or, the Tribe at the time, always on TV. Tom Hamilton always on the radio. And that's just kind of how I grew up and how I spent my summers was, with baseball on the TV and the Guardians on TV and on the radio. So that's really how I got into it. Just lifelong allegiance.
I wonder, because here in Chicago, I'm sure you've heard of Jerry Reinsdorf is public enemy number one. We do not like him. And he is a miserly owner that doesn't do the things you need to do to make a team successful. Won one World Series in 2005 and has been living off of that ever since. How do Guardians fans look at the Dolan family? I know by looking up the richest owners in baseball, they got money.
They do.
It doesn't seem like they spend a lot of money on the major league team, even though, like I'm saying, I love what the Cleveland Guardians do as an organization because they stay competitive, even though they don't spend a lot of money. Do Guardians fans and people in Cleveland look at the Dolan and say, hey, man, if you just pushed a little bit more in, we would have our World Series already?
It's pretty split, 50-50. Of course, like a lot of the fans, the passionate fans, diehard fans, which we are here in Cleveland, we love these teams so much. Of course, they want to see, them spend, especially, that was especially true, like, when the Guardians, really the Indians, had lost a lot of the pieces from the 2016 World Series roster. And when you lost fan favorites like Francisco Lindor, who would go on to become one of the highest paid players in baseball, and you traded Corey Kluber because that was a guy that you weren't going to be able to pay and take care of internally. I think a lot of fans at that point were, quick to throw the cheap label on the entire organization, but they've done a good job in recent memory taking care of their important pieces. And by important pieces, I mean nobody expected them to come to terms long term with Jose Ramirez, and obviously Jose took a big time hometown discount. The city of Cleveland means a ton to Jose Ramirez. So we were glad to get that one done. They were able to work some things out with Shane Bieber, who's been dealing with injuries. Tanner Bybee just got a payday right over the weekend. So they're doing a better job taking care of their own players. And as somebody that covers the team up close and personal, and that talks about them on a daily basis, like, I understand the way that they do their business. And you could look at some of the other ownership groups here in town, and maybe they could learn a thing or two about how the Cleveland Guardians operate. And while the Dolans are wealthy, they don't spend a lot of money. They're hands off. They let Chris Antonetti, Mike Chernoff, that entire front office do their jobs, and the jobs that they're able to do year in and year out consistently produce a winning product on the baseball diamond. And that, I think that's all that we ask for here in Cleveland. Look at last season. The trade to get Lane Thomas paid off big time. Like, had you not made that move, who knows if you made it as far in the playoffs as the Guardians were able to go. So sure, I think we always hope and wish that we could just do a little bit more, spend just a smidge more, and maybe that's what could push us past the Yankees. But yeah, I think for the most part, they're good owners who do a good job because they let their baseball people make baseball decisions.
Sounds good. Sounds simple. I wish that was here in Chicago. That'd be great. And speaking of Chicago, the folks who are listening here understand that I have been an advocate of the managers don't matter that much in wins and losses philosophy.
Yeah.
That was a couple years ago where before we had Tony La Russa here, and he messed up the White Sox, and then subsequently the Pedro Grifals of the world. So I've softened that a little bit. And so when Tito Francona retired or left the Guardians Indians a couple of years ago, I was like, Stephen Vogt, I've heard of him. Jokey, good guy. Everybody seems to like him. Like, I didn't expect what he was to do last year with the Cleveland Guardians. Like, what is it about him that lends itself to not skipping a beat from what the Tito Francona era produced?
I think Stephen Vogt is just himself. And that was always Terry Francona's big thing too, is that he was a jovial guy, really behind the scenes, obviously a baseball lifer, but he was himself. He would show up to the ballpark on that silly little scooter, whether it was, game one of the season, where at times in Cleveland, similar to Chicago, we get snow. Here's Tito on his scooter, or, game 7 of the World Series, he's arriving on that scooter. So he was unapologetically himself, and the Guardians did a phenomenal job finding Stephen Vogt because they found somebody that fits that mold and that fits their organization really seamlessly and really like a glove. And sure, there were times, when Terry Francona announced his retirement, people here in Cleveland were a bit nervous. We wanted to chase some of the big name managers that were being thrown around, and Stephen Vogt, I think, was a little bit lower on some people's list because he hadn't done it before. He was a guy that just wrapped up playing not too long ago. But that's another big piece about what the Guardians do, and what they do so well is they're constantly bringing up new talent, whether that be on the pitch, in the batting lineup. They have so many young players. That's something that's always been a staple of their success. So it makes sense in a way to have a little bit of a younger manager that was just in the spot of the players 3 years ago, 4 years ago. He was just a player himself. And I think they responded to him incredibly well during his first season. And he for sure came forth as the unquestioned leader of this baseball team moving forward. It was really seamless and kind of phenomenal to see.
And you already mentioned the guy's name, and us here in Chicago get shudders. I said shitters. Whoa. Get shudders up our spine. Is like, oh my god, no, not him again. Jose Ramirez. Like every time, like people who are listening know, every single time he faces the White Sox and there's a base open, like there's no reason to pitch against him. Like I know that now departed Josh Naylor kills the White Sox. Please let Josh Naylor kill the White Sox. Stop letting Jose Ramirez kill the White Sox. He's still there, so I know he's going to kill the White Sox and the rest of the AL. But since the departed, and we're so happy here in Chicago that Josh Naylor's in Arizona now.
Yeah.
What else is out there for the Cleveland as far as their lineup? I know they're like, hey, we got rid of one Chicago White Sox killer. Let's bring back our old Chicago White Sox killer and Carlos Santana. What else is out there for the Cleveland Guardians as far as their lineup 1 through 9?
100%. That's a great question because they did lose Josh Naylor, who I know, was definitely a thorn in your guys' side for a lot of years. And he was, a big piece of the return that the Cleveland Guardians got for Mike Clevenger back when that trade went down. So Josh Naylor, man, wish all the best to him. Like I think he's going to rake in that Arizona lineup too, by the way. Like I think for any, sports gamblers or fantasy baseballers that might be listening, like Josh Naylor is going to have a really good year, I think, in Arizona. And then the Guardians lost Andres Jimenez as well, who was not known for his bat necessarily, was more of a defensive second baseman, but that's another hole that's going to need filled. And really, that brings up the question, and Stephen Vogt's kind of talked about it at length. It'll be interesting to see what the Guards do. Sounds like Stephen Vogt is going to scoot Jose Ramirez up in that order to the 2 spot. I know Chicago fans might not want to hear that. That means more at-bats. That means more plate appearances for Jose Ramirez, the guy that's going to go down as, the greatest Cleveland baseball player of my generation, is going to be at the plate more times. And at this stage of his career, it's something that Jose wants. It's something that the organization wants him to do. And that's going to put more pressure in a world without Josh Naylor on the guys behind him. So you look at guys like Lane Thomas, who when the Guardians acquired him, cooled off a little bit. They acquired him from the Nationals. He was really hot. First couple months were kind of cool, and then, man, did he come on. And, man, was he the hero late in the season and into the postseason for the Guardians. There in center field. Right field for the Guardians just got a little bit more exciting as well. 2 guys with a lot of potential and a lot of power in Nolan Jones, who they were just able to bring back into the organization, and John Kenzie Noel, Big Christmas, as everybody knows him from the miraculous playoff heroics of last season. So the Guardians have found a couple of guys that have some pop in their bat. And that was missing, for a lot of years. They were a banjo hitting, contact making team led by Stephen Kwan, who will still set the top of the Guardians batting order every single day. But behind them, they finally beefed up the rest of the order a smidge. It finally feels like they might have a little bit more power, especially bringing back Carlos Santana, old friend for his 3rd stint here in Cleveland at first base. Kyle Manzardo will spell him at times, who's a young up-and-coming first baseman. I think the MLB might be introduced to Manzardo in short order because of his bona fide power at first. So a lot of big-time sluggers, behind Jose and Kwan now for these guards. And hopefully all of these young players that they're expecting a lot out of materialize.
I was surprised they got Nolan Jones back. I know he didn't have a good year last year in Colorado, but the year he had previous was the Nolan Jones I thought that the Cleveland traded away, and like, goodness gracious.
We were kicking ourselves. We really were. We thought that was the player as well. That was the guy that we had heard so much of, through the farm system and the power, but the big arm in right field, like it was all of that. And that was the last time he was fully 100% healthy, was that 2023 season. So hopefully that's the version of Nolan Jones that we have here coming back 2025.
And no shade to Tyler Freeman, but I didn't see anything there. I watched the games. To me, he's one of those, another one of those dispensable Cleveland Indian Guardian outfielders. They're like, okay, we'll bring in Miles Straw. Oh, Miles Straw does kind of good. All right, get out of here. You're good. Was it Oscar Gonzalez a couple years ago? Okay, get big home runs. Cool. Oh, you're not good anymore? Get out of here immediately. Like they just recycle these guys, and they have such a great farm system, and whatever Antonacci is doing out there is just blowing my mind because we have such a poor system here in Chicago, even though our system is rated high. when they come to the major leagues, they're like, what's baseball? I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think also, and this is a thing that I've had in my mind for a while, I know he gets accolades, and I know people know of him, but Jose Ramirez is the most underrated superstar in baseball because what he does at the glove at third base, because if you look at the third base position as a whole in major leagues, there's no one, I don't think, that does what he does with the bat and the glove combined at a consistent rate. And I think he'll be a Hall of Famer eventually. Can speak on your man, Jose Ramirez, because I don't think Hudson Chicago know him because he kills us. But I don't think everybody gives him the proper due that he's due.
I mean, he quite literally calls himself the GOAT, the greatest of all time. And I truly believe when I say this, I think he is going to go down for myself and for many of my generation as the greatest Cleveland baseball player of all time, of my lifetime. And Cleveland baseball has such a rich lineage of great pitchers that have come through. And even in my lifetime, I've seen so many Cy Young winners come through here, which a lot of baseball towns and baseball cities can't say. To be able to go from CC Sabathia and Cliff Lee and what they were able to do to Kluber, who won it twice, and Shane Bieber most recently, Jose Ramirez stands above all of that because of the consistency defensively and with the bat. It feels like throughout the regular season for the last decade, when you need a big hit in a big moment, number 11 comes up to the plate. The fans at Progressive Field start chanting the Jose, Jose, Jose. He means everything to this city. The fact that he took that big-time hometown discount endeared him even more to this city. I truly believe, and I want to be one of the first people to kind of, pound the table for his statue to be the iconic pose of him going into second head first with the helmet kicked off and the dreads going crazy with the helmet at his feet. He is seriously a threat on the base paths every single time he comes up to the plate. So can't say enough things about Jose Ramirez. Seriously. I mean, he calls himself the GOAT. The GOAT has become synonymous with Jose Ramirez, which has become synonymous with Cleveland baseball. He's an all-timer, and that's on the diamond and off. Off, we hear so many things, and it's tough at times for players that don't speak the English language to really break through and connect with the fans. But the way that Jose's been able to do it is just his own remarkable way. Everything else that he does, finds his own ways. They say off the diamond, he is the best and most dedicated competitor that you'll find. He sits in the clubhouse and just owns guys in Mario Kart from the second that they arrive to the ballpark to the late nights that they leave. He's on the sticks playing Mario Kart and just dominating. That's just how he is. He wants to be the best at everything, and he's the best that we have here by a lot.
And my audience appreciates you not bringing up the Tim Anderson knockout too. That was really nice of you to bypass that and just hey man, he can fight. I have to say,
could I say real quick? I have it on a shirt. I have the shirt of the punch. So yeah, it's an iconic moment for all of us. The night, and funny factoid on that, the night Cleveland native Jake Paul was set to step into the ring against I forget who he was even fighting, Silva maybe, or one of the washed up boxers that he does. It was Jose Ramirez, that delivered the biggest knockout of the night. It happened on the same night as Jake had a big fight. So yeah, crazy.
As an outsider looking in, the only part of the Cleveland Guardians roster that I can say there might be some troubles there is that starting rotation. We've already talked about former Cy Young Award winner Shane Bieber and his status. He had Tommy John last year, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But Tanner Bibee just re-signed that long-term extension at the top of the rotation. Solid. A solid 1 or 2 for any team. But after that, as a person just looking at it, I'm like, all right, there might be some questions there, but also I know the Cleveland Guardians are going to have those pitchers that you've never heard of in Chicago be top of the rotation arms. So what about these 5 to 6 guys would make the Cleveland Guardians at the top of the AL Central?
It's an interesting 5, and it is right now the Achilles heel of this team, and we'll have to find out. We know Tanner Bibee's really good. We know that he's the de facto ace of this ball club. He hates being called that, by the way, but he is. He's the ace of this ball club. Gavin Williams, another really good young arm that we have a lot of expectations for this year. That brings us to Luis Ortiz. That's your 3. That's the guy that I'm looking at in this rotation that had shown some really good stuff in Pittsburgh. That's the big return that you got in the big trades this offseason of Josh Naylor and Andres Jimenez. Here's your guy. Here's the guy that's supposed to shoulder some of the load of losing those 2 big pieces. It is Luis Ortiz. So I'm looking forward to him being in that 3 spot. And then 4 and 5, I definitely wanted to see Tristan McKenzie be that 5th starter. I just had such high hopes for him coming up through the farm system, and we saw his first couple of years in the bigs. Like, he looked the part of the guy that was good. We thought he was going to be Tanner Bybee. Like, we thought he was going to be the de facto ace. So to see him get moved to the bullpen is brutal. But it's going to be up to Logan Allen. It's going to be up to Ben Lively, who, by the way, Ben Lively was really good for the Guards last year. Like, here in Cleveland, we kept calling him like the Guardians version of Joe Flacco, who had just saved the Browns season prior, after the Browns had lost all their quarterbacks. Here comes this crazy veteran that we hadn't heard from in years, and Joe Flacco, who saved the season. That was Ben Lively last year. He saved Cleveland baseball season because when Tanner was hurt and Gavin wasn't good, it was Ben Lively winning a lot of games and shouldering the load. So I'm excited to see what this starting rotation looks like. Hopefully they're better than last year, because that was the one piece last year, especially at the end in the playoffs against the Yankees. It was like, man, I wish we had another arm. And that's why I really look to Luis Ortiz. Like, bro, if he could be that next arm and just be serviceable, just be a guy that could eat some innings, that's going to be really big.
The thing you don't have to worry about with Cleveland, it's at the end of the game. With one of the best, if not the best closer in the game in Emmanuel Clase. Like, you mentioned the name earlier in the Klubot, Corey Kluber. I believe that was one of the return is Emmanuel Clase coming back from the Texas Rangers. Like,
yep.
How is it to have a guy that throws 100-mile-per-hour cutters and just be unhittable and knowing the game is over when he comes in the game?
Well, it'll be interesting on Class A too, because all last season, I mean, he was automatic, and it was nice too because Cade Smith had a coming out party, a rookie rookie reliever not a lot of people had heard of, became the perfect setup man to Emmanuel Clase. So it was like, hey, really, with 6 outs to go, that Cade Smith is going to be really hard to hit, and then Emmanuel Clase is going to be shut down. I mean, he's a guy that is consistently hitting triple digits on the radar gun and has a nasty slider to pair with it. So it was automatic all season long. And then at the end, it completely fell off. Against the Yankees, Emmanuel Clase seemed to be broken. We were kind of campaigning to put him in ice. Like what's going on with Emmanuel Clase was the question being asked against the Yankees all last season. It was weird, too. He went on his Instagram and was kind of flexing like all of his personal accomplishments and accolades in terms of rings, when the Guardians were trying to beat the Yankees, and it was just meltdown after meltdown. So I hope this season for the Guards, it's back to that true shutdown Emmanuel Clase, because I'll be honest with you, I didn't like what I saw in the playoffs at all. I mean, he was getting hit up a ton, and it seemed like whatever was going on upstairs wasn't clicking with on the field either. So the Guards need Clase to be good for sure, because he's a big piece of that bullpen, which was the best in baseball last year, and they're going to need that again.
And one of the last things I'm going to ask you is that here in Chicago, and I'm sure you've seen the Cleveland tourism videos and the Joakim Noah clip about Cleveland. We give Cleveland a lot of grief, lots of it, because, when I went to Cleveland early in my life, it wasn't the greatest in the world. Now, I went a couple of years ago, much improved. The downtown area, much improved. Tell my folks, if they come to Cleveland for a Guardians White Sox game, what they'll be expecting, because those things have painted a negative image about Cleveland, just same as they have in Detroit. And both of those cities are much better than what the outside perception has been. As a Chicagoan, I understand that too. Sorry about that. I think I dropped.
No, you're good. Kind of cut out for a second there, but yeah.
So what is about Cleveland that you think, hey, if you come to Cleveland, you'll experience this, and the outside perception is not reality?
Yeah, it's not. And years ago, and I should really say decades ago, Cleveland wasn't especially downtown Cleveland wasn't the most glamorous place. Unfortunately, the Tribe and the Browns had to share Old Municipal Stadium down there on the lakefront. It wasn't conducive really to football. It wasn't really conducive to baseball. It wasn't conducive to anything. So in the last, 2 decades, they've done a phenomenal job with Jacobs Field, which is now Progressive Field. They've put millions on millions of dollars into renovation projects. I truly believe, and maybe it's a hometown bias for sure, but I've traveled around in my professional career to other stadiums around the MLB. Progressive Field is one of the most beautiful places to catch a ball game. They've done such a nice job with the standing room. The amount of food and restaurants that you get inside the stadium is phenomenal. And the prices aren't unbelievable, like you would get in a big major city like LA or in Atlanta. It's very comparable. And the downtown area has come such a long way. And for your listeners, for the Chicago fans, it's cool that right now we're in a spot where the Guards are going to get ready to go, and Cavs playoffs are right around the corner. That Gateway Plaza that shares, it's a little shared walkway for the Guardians in Progressive Field and the Cavs over at Rocket Arena. That area of downtown Cleveland this time next month is going to be rocking because we're going to have regular season Guardians baseball. We're going to have postseason Cavs. It's just an awesome area down there, and they've done such a great job building up East 4th, even all the way down to East 9th. The flats in downtown Cleveland have really made a comeback. You could really make a weekend now of Cleveland, and I don't think you could have said that maybe 2 decades ago.
And the last thing I got for you, and I really appreciate your time, Nick. Do a little segment here that's like why you hate the White Sox, but since I'm having guests here, I'm gonna broaden it out a little bit more. Rank your teams in the AL Central, except for the Guardians, from the most despised to the least despised or the tolerable. For me, my rankings would be Twins, who I despise the most, and their fans.
Okay.
The Royals. Then it is a tie between the Guardians and the Tigers. I really I should hate the Guardians more than I do. I don't. It's weird. But I just like their style. And the Tigers, they really haven't done anything, and their fans are pretty nice people. So your ranking of the other 4 teams in the AL Central, as far as their fans, as far as the whole experience, as far as the most despised to the least.
I like this a lot. So we'll start out with the most despised. You and I have a shared most despised, and it's the Minnesota Twins. And what's crazy about the Twins is they're like the annoying little brother. It's like you guys haven't won anything either. You guys are kind of just here with us. This division has been nothing to write home about for the last 10 years. And while you guys have had moments, sure, and regular season domination at times, especially over us in the AL Central, sure, what does it amount to? Nothing. So I'll put the Twins first because their fans, especially on social, just find a way to be aggravating. As my most hated, I'll go number 2 most hated, Detroit Tigers. Growing up, man, Miggy Cabrera was just a thorn. That was the thorn in my side. That was the thorn in my baseball fandom, was Miguel Cabrera. He was so good. And now that I'm older and now that he's retired, I think I could respect it a little bit more. But dude, at the time, when he would come up to the plate, I would just genuinely get mad. Here he is again. He was a Cleveland killer. I'll go Kansas City in my 3 spot because that run that they had, they at least won a World Series. And I think I'm, tremendously jealous about that. They've been on a downward swing since, so we could always make fun of them, that they got their 1 ring. What was that, 2015, 2014? And not a whole lot to write home about after that, but they'll be my 5. And then coming in last, I have, minimal to say bad about the White Sox. You guys, it's almost gotten to the point, and I don't mean to, patronize. It's almost gotten to the point where it's I think, consistent with some of the rest of the teams in the Central as well. It's bad. And Chicago too, similar to Cleveland, we like to throw our jabs back and forth, but the cities have so many parallels where you guys are passionate sports fans in all levels. For the Bears, they're, great, legendary, legendary franchise there. Same with Chicago baseball. That's, consistent with the Cubs, consistent with the White Sox. Like, you guys love your sports. So for the fact that the White Sox have been this bad for this long, like, that ownership group deserves all of the grief that they get, because that if the White Sox would be good, they'd consistently be in the top quarter of TV ratings, consistently in the top of attendance. It's just that the ownership hasn't given fans literally nothing to get excited about. So I, have very little animosity towards the White Sox. If anything, it's starting to become apathy towards the White Sox. It's been way too bad for way too long.
Understood. Hey, no offense taken. My audience is on the same page. We do not like the White Sox. If I was to open this up to White Sox fans and I kept the White Sox in there, I guarantee the White Sox would be at the top of that list. So we really appreciate you coming on with us, Nick. Tell the folks where they can find you on the social medias and where you're working at right now and all the good stuff that you're doing out there in Cleveland.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. It's always a blast to talk American League Central.
So where can they find you? On which sites can they find you?
Yeah, for sure. You could check me out and on all of our Guardians coverage on the Big Play Sports Network. Download the Big Play app. Is my Big Play Cleveland show, live in there every week. That's a TV show. I'm live on the Big Factor as well. That's every morning, 10 a.m. Eastern. We do a lot of Guards and MLB talk on the Big Factor, and then weekends, 92.3 The Fan, local radio up here in Cleveland. Kind of a newer venture for me. I've always wanted to do the talk show radio thing, so it's kind of cool to get some weekend reps over on the radio side.
That is Nick Pedone joining us from Cleveland. Really appreciate his time. Join our other episodes of the AL Central previews. Right now, this is the Cleveland Guardians one. I have a Tigers one coming up. Tomorrow, we're going to have a Twins and a Royals one. So thank you very much for Nick for joining us. The next couple of days, we'll be having some fun because we need to talk good baseball here in Chicago. And yes, there's good baseball here in the AL Central. So for Nick Pedone, my name is Herb Lawrence. Thank you for joining us here on the Addison the 35th podcast.